If you would like to listen to or download any or all of Power at Work's blogcasts in podcast form, they are available for streaming and download on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. Just search Power at Work on any podcast platform and enjoy all of Power at Work's podcasts. While you're there, two things we would like you to do. First, subscribe, and that way you won't miss any Power at Work podcasts. Second, please give Power at Work a 5-star rating, a like, a love, whatever is the tool that your podcast provider gives you. It helps others who care about workers and worker power to find Power at Work's content. They will be grateful, and so will we. Hello, powerful people, and welcome back to the Power Half Hour live on LinkedIn and published for posterity on poweratwork.us. I'm Seth Harris from the Burns Center for Social Change. And the Power Half Hour brings you more voices, more news, and more worker power insights in just 30 minutes. I've got an expert panel of 3 guests from all around the country even, who I will introduce to you in just a minute. Our video audience, of course, can see them arrayed in front of you. The panelists are going to talk about the big stories and the biggest developments affecting worker power, workers, and unions, and they're going to look into the future and they're going to tell us what important worker power developments are coming down the pike. And then, at the very end, we will offer our guests a genuinely pitiful but deeply heartfelt thank you by allowing them to engage in shameless plugs and shout-outs. They can promote whatever or whoever they would like, and self-promotion is enthusiastically welcomed. And then, audience, if you're hungry for more, stay with us for the Power Half Hour overtime. We'll take questions and comments from our live audience. We already have some questions that have been emailed to us. I will tell you right at the start of overtime how to email your questions to us if you'd like to do that for the next show in 2 weeks. But for today, we will take your live questions and answer those emailed questions. But that's going to happen in overtime, which will start in about 28 minutes. Before I introduce you to the people who are going to make you smarter, audience, stay up to date with the Power Half Hour by following the Power at Work page on LinkedIn and subscribing to Power at Work at poweratwork.us. Just go to poweratwork.us. The subscription form will pop up. Give us your name, give us your email. We promise we will not give it to anybody else, or much worse, sell it to anybody else. And now, let's meet our panel from the largest borough in the greatest city on earth, Brooklyn, New York. He's a journalist and author who writes about labor, politics, and boxing. It's Hamilton Nolan. Welcome back to the Power Half Hour, Hamilton.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
And from the Big Easy, New Orleans, Louisiana, he's a professor of economics at the University of New Orleans and a longtime labor expert. It's our friend, Dr. Ali Bustamante. Hello, Ali.
Hi, nice to be here again, Seth.
Great to have you. And from the River City, Jacksonville, Florida. He's on location, everybody. He's an actor, a podcaster, a voiceover artist, a labor communications specialist, a SAG-AFTRA member, and a coordinator of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. And that's just the first page of his CV, y'all. It's our buddy, Harold Phillips. Harold, fantastic to have you back.
It's so great to be back, Seth, but I have to take issue with something you said earlier. You said that we were going to make the listeners smarter. In my experience, I make them dumber, so hopefully Hamilton and Ollie are going to balance me out a little bit.
I was taking the whole equation into account, Harold, and doing the netting out. So all in all, people are going to be smarter, and they're going to get smarter right now with topic number 1. Starting with you, Hamilton, let's look over our shoulder. We're going to look in the rearview mirror, and you're going to tell us what was the most interesting or the most important or the biggest news story affecting workers, worker power, and unions over the last couple of weeks. Hamilton.
All right, I'm going to go a bit farther back, a month back, and this is, I think, an undercovered story, which was the AFL-CIO convention. AFL-CIO convention happens every 4 years, the equivalent of the presidential convention for the union world. I was not able to go myself this time, and I'm really upset that I didn't get to go, partly because there's very, very little news coverage of the AFL-CIO convention, which is reflective of, I think, it says something bad about the power of unions in society that the AFL-CIO convention gets so little coverage. Very, very, and I think an all-time low this year. But there are some substantive announcements that do come out of the AFL-CIO convention. In the last convention, the substantive announcement was Liz Schuler, the head of the AFL-CIO, promised to organize 1 million new workers in 10 years. And if you did the math on that, you would see that doing that would cause union density to continue to decline. So it was sort of a extremely, extremely low bar goal. This AFL-CIO convention, the big announcement by Liz Schuler, who was reelected as the head of the AFL-CIO, was a promise to unionize 2 million new workers in 5 years. So I guess they started doing the math a little bit more, maybe realized they need to be a bit more ambitious. But what was not announced, and what I think is the substance of the news that we need to get, is what's the plan for organizing these 2 million new workers? Is there a budget? Is the AFL-CIO itself going to put money into this? Is it relying on its member unions? Like, what is the plan? There were no details, and unfortunately, there was very little reporting that came out about any of the substance behind this announcement. And a bit of context is that, the growth that we've seen since the last AFL-CIO convention, a lot of it has been driven just by already unionized firms getting bigger rather than big, successful new organizing campaigns, which is what we need to really move the needle on union density, which is how we're going to grow the labor movement. So something for everybody to keep an eye on, the big picture of union density, and also to ask the questions of the people in power. What's the plan for this? What's the budget? And how are we actually going to do it?
Yeah, so you'll remember not at the most recent convention, but the convention 4 years ago, they did pass a new per capita tax on the unions, and they brought in, I think it was something like $11 million to create a strategic organizing effort inside the AFL-CIO, which was a coordinating effort focused, I believe, mostly on the South and the Midwest. But like you, I'm not aware of any reporting out of the results of that effort. So there's a pot of money. I don't know if it's 11 million a year or if it's 11 million one time.
Yeah.
But that would be a sizable amount of money for organizing, and certainly I know they brought together unions to do some planning. I just don't know whether anything has come out of that. Do you know more?
Well, they did what you're talking about. They did raise the per caps. It was about 11 million a year, should be recurring, and they started a thing called the Center for Transformational Organizing, which is maybe a little grandiose for $11 million a year, which is 1% of what we probably need to be spending, but better than nothing. And I would echo you and say, since they launched that, and they did talk about, unionizing. This was when Biden was president, so they were looking at the South and looking at firms that were getting federal money, and obviously the game has changed a lot since then. And there's been very little to no communication from the AFL, I think, about what has actually been accomplished, what the goals are, if the goals are shifting, what the budget is happening. So it would be great to see a little more communication, or a lot more communication from the AFL itself about where the money's coming from and what it's doing.
Let's hope no news is good news. Harold, look back a couple of weeks. Tell us what the biggest story, most important story, most compelling story for workers and worker power has been.
Well, I'm going to go the weekend after Hamilton, who went to the AFL-CIO convention, because that next weekend was the Labor Notes Conference in Chicago. And by all reports, this Labor Notes Conference was very intense, but not necessarily as enthusiastic as previous conferences over the past 10, 20 years have been, and more determined. A lot of rank and file union members from around the country came to the conference to meet with each other, learn new tactics for organizing, talk about some of the big issues in the movement. And like Hamilton alluded to, the world is different now. It's an entirely different environment than the last conference 2 years ago. And there was a lot of energy towards response to attacks as opposed to building something new. It was, how do we stand together? How do we fight back? And as a result, you did get a lot of determination from the conference attendees. Some of the topics that were discussed were around AI, as you might expect, the Minneapolis general strike, but also there were a lot of caucus meetings for rank and file union members working in different sectors. There were a lot of organizing efforts at Amazon, for instance, and a lot of Amazon organizing organizations, that's redundant, came together to discuss their tactics. There was a caucus for entertainment workers. There was a caucus for railroad workers. So a lot of what Labor Notes is about building power in the rank and file. And a lot of people left Chicago feeling empowered and being ready to fight.
That's exciting and uplifting and really, really good to hear. Ali, what is the biggest labor story of the last couple of weeks?
Well, I'll go with this past Thursday's job report and something not very uplifting at all. The report basically gave us a weak headline and an even weaker underlying, details within the report. The top line number was basically that we gained about 57,000 jobs this past June. And that's a pretty disappointing number on its own. But once you actually look beneath the headline, there's a lot of concerning aspects within that report. First off, the payroll gains for April and May were actually revised down by a combined 74,000 jobs. This pretty much tells us the labor market was a lot weaker than we even thought before. And this isn't just one bad month. It's really a broader pattern of just slowing labor demand over the past year. We know that the job growth that did occur remains very narrow. It's largely concentrated in healthcare, which accounted for about 47,000 of the 57,000 jobs added in June. That means when you look at the entire rest of the economy, we basically added only about 10,400 jobs. And so that's pretty disappointing. But the biggest story is actually the wages. That was actually something that has been largely underreported. The fact that real average hourly earnings actually fell in April and again in May, basically breaking about the modest real wage gains that workers have experienced over the past 3 years or so. And this really matters a lot because the labor market is weakening, and at the same time, inflation again is coming back, eroding paychecks. So we're looking at a labor market where workers are facing fewer opportunities, but they're also seeing less value in the pay that they bring home. So the labor market picture is really becoming a lot more complicated and troubling. We knew that we were already in a low fire labor market. Employers, not laying off workers en masse, but they're also not hiring aggressively. We know that job growth had been really concentrated. And on top of that, though, now we're actually seeing some additional new signs of strain with labor force participation falling, the employment to population ratio falling. The number of long-term unemployed is up by nearly 300,000 over the year. And these details matter a lot because they tell us something important about worker power, as we all know, and that's a labor market doesn't have to be collapsing for workers to lose leverage. If hiring is weak, participation is falling, you're seeing long-term unemployment rising, then that means workers have fewer outside options. And that's really what it comes down to. The fact that if it's harder to switch jobs, if it's harder to negotiate for higher wages, it's going to be harder to walk away from poor working conditions. And this is where, we're looking at wages slipping and at the same time workers, feeling like they're losing ground every day. And so this is a big reason why, we got to look beyond the headline figures. 4.2% unemployment rate does not tell the whole story. On paper, that makes, the job gains look like we have a stable labor market, but underneath that, the picture is really less reassuring. A growing share of Americans are either struggling to find work or completely stuck out of work for longer, or finding that the work that's actually available for them is just simply not paying enough to keep up with the cost of living. So the takeaway is that we're becoming a much less secure labor market, less rewarding at the same time, and this is going to completely eat up for an increasing number of Americans every month that this pattern keeps going.
Yeah. Let me just, I want to agree with your assessment, and then I want to just emphasize one statistic that you mentioned and then point out another one that is really, really troubling. You made the point about the fact that healthcare is essentially the only sector that's growing. There are two actually that are growing: healthcare and social assistance. If you take healthcare and social assistance out of the calculus and look back over the last year, the entire rest of the economy, and we're talking transportation, manufacturing, construction, financial services, business services, just the entire retail, the entire rest of the private sector, because the government sector is shrinking, but the entire rest created 100,000 jobs over the course of a year, about 8,000 jobs a month. That is a disaster for our economy. We are not growing. Most of the economy is either stagnant or declining when it comes to jobs.
Just add to the few gains that we actually saw outside of healthcare, which were in leisure and hospitality. All of that has basically lost this past month, that it actually declined by 61,000 jobs. So all these folks who were just clinging on to these kind of low wage jobs, those jobs are gone now.
They're out of work. And here's the other very important data point, and that is, and it explains why the unemployment rate has not gone up, even though we have just disastrously weak job growth. The United States of America in June had 1 million fewer workers than it had a year ago in June of 2025. We have lost 1 million workers. Now, a lot of those are undocumented who are being either forced out of the country or are fleeing the country because they don't want to be the subject of a paramilitary raid on their families. But it's other workers too. It's not just that workers are participating less, it's that people are just leaving the economy. They're getting out of the economy as a whole. That is the worst sign for economic growth we could possibly experience. Let me say, it is not AI that is doing that. It is immigration enforcement and people's deep disappointment with the job opportunities that they are not finding in the economy. This is a terrible prescription for working people, for worker power, and for the economy as a whole. It's just a disaster. Sorry to end on such a negative note. Okay, let's go to topic number 2, because we're going to look forward, and that gives us the opportunity for a little bit of optimism. I hope. We'll see. We'll see where everybody takes it. Okay, we're going to get our crystal balls out. We're going to look into the future. We're not looking to 21, 23. We're looking instead to the next few days, next few weeks, next few months, next few years. And we're answering the question, and Harold, we're going to start with you. Welcome back. What is the most important story or the most important development or innovation or event that will affect workers, worker power, and unions coming down the pike?
You know, Seth, I wish I could buoy us with some optimism, but unfortunately, things look pretty dark in one particular area of labor, and that's political endorsements. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a guy named Graham Plattner in Maine. The news broke yesterday about some sexual assault allegations, and a lot of people have been calling for him to drop out of the Maine Senate race. But why this is a labor story is because, against many union members' misgivings, given some of the things that they knew about Plattner's past and his temperament, a lot of big unions in Maine, including the Maine AFL-CIO, lined up to support him. And the Democratic establishment, including, I believe, the Senate Minority Leader, really pushed to make Plattner the nominee. Now, I've talked in the past about how union leadership and rank and file members seem to be out of step with each other when it comes to political endorsements. And there's been a growing wedge in a lot of unions between who the union endorses and supports and who the rank and file members want to support, given their views and, frankly, given what labor is getting once these people are in office. I talked about labor notes a little bit ago. One of the big topics of conversation was, what are we getting from supporting Democrats? Is it really in labor's best interest to be all in on the Democratic Party? I think this Plattner thing is going to emphasize that even more in union members' minds, and I think it's going to spark a lot of conversation about this endorsement process.
Yeah, I just wanted to clean up one thing that you mentioned. The Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, supported the incumbent governor, Janet Mills, against Plattner. But the rest of what you said, I think, is basically right. He was for Mills, who didn't even make it to the primary because Plattner was beating her so badly, at least in the polling. He was so far ahead of her in the polling. But boy, this Plattner story is lots and lots and lots of implications for us. Okay, Ali, what is the biggest story, the most important development, the biggest innovation coming for working people in the near-term future?
Well, I kind of alluded to it with the decline in real wages that we've had over the past couple of months. I really think the near-term story to watch is the collision between the persistent inflation that we're actually seeing and the weakening labor market. As I kind of mentioned, it's a really dangerous mix for workers, and it's difficult also for the Federal Reserve. Just this week, the new Federal Reserve Governor, Christopher Waller, said basically the risk in the U.S. economy now appear tilted toward higher inflation. So again, that's higher inflation as the labor market continues to be weakening. And so what's really striking is that higher inflation no longer looks like a distant possibility as we kind of thought it just a few months ago. It really seems to be increasingly getting priced in, whether you're looking at the Federal Reserve's tone, in market expectations, and just like in broader economic conversations. Markets are really now assigning a huge probability to renew tightening of interest rates in September. The Federal Reserve projections, they show inflation ending more than a percentage point above target at the end of the year. And this is a really core problem. Inflation, as I mentioned, is still above target. Expectations around future inflation are drifting upward. We just actually had the New York Fed report this week that the one-year inflation expectations are going to increase to about 3.7% in June. It's really the highest level of inflation since we've seen in 3 years. And so this is a really, really big deal. The Federal Reserve really can't easily pivot towards rate cuts to support growth because doing so might, promote higher inflation. But the labor market, we know, isn't strong enough to absorb additional pressure. So even if the unemployment rate, remains low on paper, we know that the, labor market is softening. Worker power and economic security are on the decline. And so for the Federal Reserve, it's really a bind. Inflation seems to be sticky. Largely a lot of it is energy prices, with the Iran conflict, but also just the possibility of additional supply side disruptions. And so it seems like, interest rates are going to be high and maybe even go higher in the near future. But that's really going to have the potential of hitting a labor market that is already weak. Again, just further diminishing mobility, really making a situation where higher inflation is going to just continue to eat at the cost of living at workers. And that's really where the other thing, of the broader political economy, comes in. We know that when workers are facing slower hiring, weaker wage growth, higher prices, this is not just economic discomfort. It's going to have a lot of social and political implications. And so the next few months are really going to be telling in terms of how much workers are just willing to take. And if, this kind of breeding insecurity and frustration is really going to create some sort of, broader volatility, again, not just in the economy, but broader, socially and politically as well.
Yeah, I just to make it a little, to bring it down to ground level, what that high inflation number means is that workers, workers who are in unions, who have contracts that have cost of living adjustments, are to some extent protected from the effects of inflation. There's almost always a lag. There's a whole bunch of reasons why even they are not protected, but they're better off because they will eventually get a pay increase that offsets the inflation increase, depending upon how the cost of living adjustment is written in their contract. Every other worker in America is looking at pay cuts. That's what the inflation remaining high means, is that they get a paycheck that is worth less than they did a month ago, a year ago. And it's really damaging to families because the overwhelming majority of Americans are just living paycheck to paycheck. So they're having to make choices between prescription drugs and food and rent and gas for their cars. Maybe gas prices coming down will alleviate that, but it's not going to bring inflation back down to where we need it to be at the target level to be successful. I think that's a very, very important point. All right, so Hamilton, it's all up to you to leave us on an optimistic note on topic number 2, something uplifting, something inspirational. Go ahead. I don't want to set you up. I don't want to set up the threshold too high. I don't want to set you up to fail, but go ahead, hit us.
No pressure.
Wow, economists are so negative. I'm going to talk also about a political story, which is the Faster Labor Contracts Act. This is, you'll recall, the PRO Act, which was the big overarching labor law reform bill that was the highest priority of the AFL-CIO and pro-labor Democrats. Did not get it passed under Biden because of the filibuster. We're going to need to get rid of the filibuster to ever pass it. It would have been truly a game-changing bill, would have really gone a long way to fixing our broken labor laws. What's happened now is that the Republicans have pulled out one provision of the PRO Act and called it the Faster Labor Standards Act. This has passed the House now. This bill has passed the House. And what it says is essentially that once you unionize, a clock starts on negotiating your first contract after 120 days. If you haven't come to an agreement, there's mandatory arbitration to get you a first contract. Now, we should say this is a serious substantive reform. I mean, this would be a big deal and would help unions very, very much if this were to become law. This, Bernie Sanders' labor plan had a similar element to this because, in addition, one of the reasons why it's hard to build union power is not just union busting of organizing drives. It's once you get your union, there's almost no way to force companies to actually come to the table and negotiate contracts. So if you could really put a legal clock on these contracts, it would be a big deal. And Josh Hawley is pushing this bill. He's one of the headline sponsors. And so, as part of his kind of pro-labor Republican persona that he and other members of the party are trying to cultivate. And so I am going on record to say that although this bill has passed the House, it's all bullshit. The Republicans are never going to pass this bill because it would be a substantive reform. There's two categories of politicians who support bills. There's politicians who support bills that they know are not going to pass, and then who support the bill that could possibly pass. This has passed the House. It's not going to pass the Senate. And I, again, will take anybody's bet that it will never pass a Republican Senate, and that, in fact, we are going to have to get rid of the filibuster to ever pass substantive labor law reform along these lines. And what Republicans are trying to do here is, again, to cultivate their image of concern for the working class without having to do something that would really displease their business sponsors, which this bill would. And I guarantee you that taking away businesses' ability to not sign first union contracts would really, really, really displease all of corporate America. So there's interesting political dynamics. I wish it would pass. I don't think it'll pass. I would even question if the Democrats could pass it. The Democrats couldn't pass the PRO Act. I mean, when it comes right down to it, there's a lot of business opposition to fixing labor law, and it's definitely not going to happen under Republicans. And I would urge everybody to be very skeptical of the entire project of pro-worker Republicanism.
So we don't need no Kalshi or Poly Market. We just got the definitive prediction about what's going to happen with that bill. And let me just say, I'm a +1 on that one. I agree with you. It ain't happening. It's a shame that it's not going to happen. We need it to happen. It would be transformative. And you're exactly right. That's why it's not going to happen. All right. It's time for everybody's favorite topic. It's shameless plugs and shout outs. Each guest gets about a minute to plug or shout out anything or anyone they would like. Ali Bustamante, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
Well, I've kind of mentioned this before, but it's the UCLA Strategic Labor Research Conference. It's happening August 7th through 9th. It's hosted by the UCLA Strategic Labor Research Lab. I'll be presenting. I'll be running a panel associated with using data and data visualizations to promote worker power. So that's my, using my economist doomsday data angle to work. We're going to do something positive with it. This year, Sarah Nelson, the national president of the Association of Flight Attendants, is going to be the keynote. But again, it's it's going to bring more than 200 labor and movement researchers and organizers. It's a great place to learn and just see what other folks are building, what campaigns are running, and just importantly, just be in community with other folks in the movement. So, highly recommend.
Excellent. Hamilton Nolan, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
I'm going to give a plug and a shout out to In These Times magazine. I'm a labor journalist, and over the course of my couple decades now as a journalist covering labor issues are still as important as they ever were, but the number of outlets really committed to covering it and paying reporters to cover it has gone down and down and down and down. A lot of reporters are like me now, have our own independent sites, hamiltonnolan.com. Great place to subscribe to, yes. But we need real magazines and publications, that are committed to labor journalism. In These Times has now been around 50 years, which is a huge accomplishment for a small left-wing magazine. I promise you, they're fundraising now. And look, everybody in the labor movement, we need labor journalism to exist. In order to do that, we need to support these publications. So great thing to subscribe to, donate to, send it to your friends. In These Times.
That's a great shout out. Harold Phillips, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
Well, of course, I want to encourage all the listeners to go to laborradionetwork.org and check out the nearly 250 radio shows and podcasts that are part of the network, including, I believe, Power at Work. But I also work with an organization called the Labor Heritage Foundation. And it's summer. It's road trip time. Even given the gas prices, people are taking trips on the road. And when you take trips on the road, you want to find interesting things to look at. One of the things the Labor Heritage Foundation has put together is an interactive labor landmark map. So when you think about labor history, you think about big figures, big events in towns like Chicago and New York. But there is labor history all around us in our own backyards. Most people just don't know where it is. So if you're going to be taking a drive, go to laborheritage.org, click on the picture of the map, and find the labor landmarks in your backyard. And if we don't have them on the map, click the red button that says suggest a landmark and add it in.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that one. All right, audience, stick with us if you can. We're going to begin Power Half Hour's overtime in just a minute. For Harold Phillips, Hamilton Nolan, Ali Bustamante, and our producer, Ayush Kanvalkar, thank you for joining the Power Half Hour. Stick around for overtime, but for now, stay powerful, everybody. All right, you all, take a breath, take a sip of something. Whatever you happen to have in front of you. Harold, probably a bourbon would be my. I'm guessing. I'm just guessing.
Really, it's water.
And we're going to give Ayush an opportunity to populate the chat with our questions, and he's going to run over to LinkedIn, and if the live audience has any questions, post them on this live cast. LinkedIn cast of the Power Half Hour, and Ayush will pick it up there and bring it over here, and we will answer your question right here. However, if you would like to ask a question that you're okay with the next panel answering in 2 weeks on July 21st, then you can send an email, as some of the folks have done today, to poweratwork@theburnscenter.org. That's poweratwork at THEBURNES center.org. And then we will ask your question of the next panel. We obviously won't be able to get to it today. It's too hard to do that. It's too technically hard to do that. Okay, so I have a few questions here that came in by email. Here's number one, and Harold, this is picking up on your comments about our friend Graham Plattner. Here's the question. In New York and other states, we have seen Democratic Socialist candidates defeat incumbents, especially for Congress. I think probably referring to New York and Colorado, maybe some others that I'm not mentioning. There's obviously a big contest going on in the Michigan Senate race right now. Going back to the question, some of those incumbents had a lot of union support. So the incumbents who were defeated had a lot of union support. Some even had support from the Working Families Party. Why are there political fights between groups that say they support workers? Why can't they get together and choose the most pro-worker, pro-union candidates that they can all support? Harold, you want to start us off on that one?
Actually,
I think everybody may have opinions about that one, but why don't you start us off?
I think Hamilton really kind of hit the nail on the head when he was talking about the Faster Labor Contracts Act. It's one thing to say you're going to support workers to get elected. It's another thing entirely to support workers when you're elected. So it's important to remember that elections are all about the marketing. They're all about getting you to sign on the dotted line to make that purchase. And then once folks get in office, well, they're free to do whatever until the next election. So why can't people come together and support the candidate who's going to fight the most for working people? It really comes down to whether that candidate is likely to fight for working people once they actually get in office.
Hamilton, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, the dissatisfaction of people in the labor movement with the Democratic Party, which Harold touched on, which is very real and for a lot of good reasons, right? You know, it's important to say also, like, you know, we need to tell people, like, that doesn't mean you have to be a Republican, because the Republicans are even worse on all of the issues that union people care about. You know, the rise of the left within the Democratic Party and the rise of Democratic Socialists that we're seeing in Zoran in New York, and Claire Valdez, a UAW union organizer who was just won the Democratic primary in New York for Congress. I mean, this is the other path, you know, and these candidates, these DSA candidates, are very, very strongly aligned with the labor movement. I mean, they are out on the picket lines. They are out at every union rally. Like, I have covered a lot of politics in New York, and I've never seen more voraciously, you know, union supporting candidates than this crop of candidates, you know. So it's important to say that, like, yes, we're a two-party system, but within those parties, there's always a struggle for power. And what we're seeing play out, I think, the rise of these left-wing candidates, you know, can be beneficial to the labor movement by pushing the Democratic Party in that direction.
Yeah. Ali, do you want to jump in on this one?
No, the only thing I just add is that, you know, we also have to think about the administrative state where a lot of this gets adjudicated, right? And so we know that even, you know, from the legislative side aside, administratively, it's a mess right now. And so it goes back to this just broader idea that, you know, there's a lot going on, there's a lot being said without any actual feasible way to improve workers' lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's the only comment that I would add to this is I think there's not a lot of disagreement. I mean, there's sort of a difference in emphasis and a difference in energy. But on the worker power issues that people vote on in the United States Congress, and I think this is true in a lot of legislatures too, there's, you know, among progressive Democrats and Democratic Socialist candidates, if those are the two camps, there's not a lot of dissent. You know, you have some wayward Democrats like Governor Abigail Spanberger of Virginia who just outright lie to workers and screw them in the end. But most other progressive Democrats are voting the way unions want them to vote. And unions are trying to, you know, support them and reward them for having been supportive, and generally don't want to oppose incumbents, because that makes it a lot harder to go in and lobby those folks or to lobby other folks who might be at risk in the future. So I'm not advocating for any particular position, but I think that's one of the reasons why folks are not coming together. I would also add this point, which is maybe too obvious to be mentioned, but I'll mention it anyway. These are not the only issues. I think the Israel-Gaza issue is a critical divide in the Democratic Party right now, and it played a gigantic role in a number of the primaries, certainly that happened in New York, certainly the congressional primary that happened in Colorado. I think that issue has taken on a bigger meaning than merely the particular policy at stake there. It's taken on a question of old versus young, past history, former history, colonialism and imperialism versus national liberation and respect for particularly people of color. I think it's representative of a lot of issues to a lot of people. I don't think that's the only issue. I think also there's just a lot of frustration with people who've been in office for a long time. There's a lot of anti-incumbency. So I don't think it's the worker issues that are at the heart of the split. But yeah, I think it's worth noting that there are worker supporters on both sides of these both sides of these candidacies or these elections, and it's really hard to know how those things are going to turn out. Okay, Ali, this is one that's pretty almost. Oh no, I'll come to that in just a second. Now that the Supreme Court, here's a new question. Now that the Supreme Court has decided that Trump can fire independent agency leaders, do you expect he will fire the last remaining Democrat on the NLRB? I can take this one on. Does anybody else want to jump in on this one? I could take that one on. So the last remaining Democrat on the NLRB is a labor lawyer by the name of Dave Prouty. Trump is not going to fire him. Trump actually just nominated him for a new term, and he's had a hearing in the Senate Help Committee, which is the committee that oversees the NLRB. There has not been a confirmation vote on the floor, which was a big surprise. I think people expected not just Dave's nomination to be rushed through, but the Republican whose name I believe is Jim Macy, who was nominated. They expected him to be rushed through because that would put 3 Republicans on the NLRB along with Dave. So I do not expect Trump to fire Dave Prouty, at least not for now, not while he's the nominee to be reconfirmed to his position. Ultimately, it won't matter if they can get the Republican nominee confirmed. It will be 3 Republicans to 1 Democrat, and I think we can expect a lot of bad things to flow from that. So the answer is no for now, but it'll be interesting to see if a Democrat replaces Donald Trump, if a Democrat follows Donald Trump, if they fire all of the Republicans who are serving on. They'll certainly fire at least 1 so that Democrats can quickly get a majority. Ali, this is the one that I saw that picks up on your comment. And I think it's a member of our audience just absolutely forcing us to try to say something positive because we're a depressing lot today. Here's the question. Last week's jobs report was bleak. Are there any signs that the economy is going to get better for working people anytime soon?
Yeah, one actually glimmer of hope, and it actually goes back to something you said, Seth, which is none of this is being driven by AI, right? Like we know that the stagnancy and job growth is not AI related whatsoever. So one silver lining is that over the past 3 years or so, when we look at professional and business services, which is, again, the sector where we largely think that AI would have the greatest impact. Now that sector has been on decline for the past 3 years. It's lost about 300,000 jobs. But actually last month, it gained 30,000 jobs. And this is kind of, it's had gains now in 5 consecutive months. And so what this is kind of really telling us is, one, it seems like some of the earliest evidence that AI is not causing any kind of major job loss, not kind of any, especially when it comes to white collar jobs. Not to say that it's never going to happen, but it's certainly not happening now. But the other part that I would just actually say that's particularly important is because professional and business services tend to anchor a lot of the activity in other sectors as well. And so, if I'm going to put any money or any bet on there being a silver lining and perhaps a small turn upward for a labor market, it's going to be hanging on that sector, showing continued improvement. But the one thing that I would just kind of go back to is just there's so much economic uncertainty. Again, energy prices, just policymaking is a mess at the administrative level that a lot of economic policy making is just going to be really, really difficult over the next few months, and that's going to continue to put some strains on even these potential positives that we see in the labor market.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that you just said, particularly the point about AI. Let me add one other point in. I think the sense of a lot of people who are observing what's going on in the economy is that employers are sort of stuck. They can't figure out what decisions to make because there's so much uncertainty, and we have a president who just can wake up one morning and drop a bomb on an oil refinery and affect the world's oil supply, and go to war with our allies, and impose a bunch of tariffs, and it just, there's so much uncertainty. But I think the best hope, and this is like a thin hope, and boy, putting hope on America's employers is a deeply perilous exercise. But at some point, there are just decisions that are going to have to be made. There are going to be hiring decisions that have to be made. There's going to be investment decisions that are going to have to be made. They can't wait forever. Now, the risk is that the decisions they make are bad decisions for workers. They could, there have been not a lot of layoffs in our economy. As you said, it's a low hire economy. A whole bunch of people could be fired because they could, businesses could come to the conclusion that the economy is not going to grow, that we're very slow, and that we're not going to pick up pace anytime soon, at least not as long as Donald Trump is president. And so, but maybe it's just folks just grow impatient and they start making decisions independent of the policy environment. Certainly Wall Street doesn't operate that way, but the people who do the real work of our country, not the manipulative work of our country, really do have to start making some decisions. Maybe that maybe is the only hope. Maybe Hamilton's pitch on organizing will influence the way the labor movement works, and we'll see a bunch more organizing. I wish that were going to be true. I hope that's going to be true, and there certainly is organizing going on underway. Maybe that will help as well. Okay.
Well, Seth, if you'll permit
Sorry,
me.
Please go ahead, Harold.
There's been a lot of talk about AI, and there is actually a fair amount of organizing happening right now in the tech sector. Something that a lot of people said wasn't really going to happen because tech workers are white collar, or because they're comfortable, or because they're siloed from each other and not working in the same location. But a lot of what's driving that organizing is the layoffs. There have been a number of layoffs in the tech sector, and particularly in the video game sector. Right now, there's a national strike in France over all the layoffs that have been happening in the French video game industry. So I think that in a lot of ways, one follows the other. You're right. The decision makers are going to make decisions. They are often bad decisions, and the workers are responding as a result. And we're seeing tremendous organizing. We're seeing tremendous reaction. And I think that is another bright spot that we can see, given these troubled times, is that people aren't laying down and taking it. They're ready to stand up and get in the streets.
So that questioner succeeded in getting us to say something optimistic. How about that? Look at that. It worked. Okay, last question. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were no large strikes underway in the U.S. during June after the Harvard graduate workers ended their strike. Let me just, a little preface before I get to the actual question. The Bureau of Labor Statistics only counts what are called mass strikes, which is strikes involving 1,000 workers or more. We lost Hamilton, I think. Or at least, we lost Hamilton. That's a shame, because this might have been a good question for him. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were no large strikes underway in the
U.S. had something to say.
Yeah. Oh, wait, he's back. So that's good. So there are no large strikes, according to BLS, in June. That was maybe the first time in a while. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So is it a good thing or a bad thing that there were no large strikes in June?
Bad.
Hamilton.
Bad. It's a bad
Tell us
thing.
why it's bad.
I mean, when you track the decline of organized labor power over, the whole second half of the 20th century continuing to today, you not only see a decline in union density, a decline in, the percentage of workers who are unionized and the power of unions, but you also see an enormous decline in the number of strikes. So the number of strikes is a rough, not a perfect, but a rough proxy for how strong and how active the labor movement itself is. You go back to the 70s and you see many, hundreds and thousands of big strikes, and today, very, very anemic number. That said, I will say the nurses in Boston, Brigham and Women's Hospital, yes, are about to go on what has been reported as the biggest nurses' strike in Massachusetts history. I think maybe only a one-day strike, but strikes will be back. But yes, in general, if you like the labor movement, we want to see more strikes.
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah,
Harold,
I'll just add very quickly that when you look at the overall patterns, summers tend to be the weakest time for strike activity, generally speaking, and so it's not necessarily a huge anomaly. In May, we actually had the Long Island Railroad strike, which was pretty considerable, but that was the only major strike that was reported in May. So fingers crossed that this fall, we see a little bit of a resurgence, another, labor, striketober perhaps. But it really does remain to be seen, though, that the pattern that we've always seen is pretty dull summers for labor activity, but over the past couple of years, it's just been pretty low figures relative to the 2 years prior to that.
Yeah, Harold.
I'm going to kind of go a different direction here. I'm sorry. I mean, I get it. Big strikes are sexy. When you have tens of thousands of people in the street of Los Angeles, everybody pays attention. Seth, I'm going to go back to what you said at the beginning of this. The BLS numbers only share big strikes, like strikes of over 1,000, I think it is. There are actually labor actions happening all over this country. There's a labor action happening in suburban Chicago right now with a bunch of mechanics outside a Cadillac dealer. So the notion that we don't have people filling the streets indicating that the labor movement is somehow anemic, I think, is maybe not all that correct. We don't have to have masses of people in the streets in order to have workers standing up to the boss and fighting for a fair deal. They can be people in groups of 5 or 10 or 20. How many Starbucks actions have we seen over the past few weeks? And they've just unionized their, 710th store as a result. So, yeah, it's nice when you see a huge strike. It really shows labor flexing its muscle. That doesn't mean that there isn't some muscle flexing going on a smaller scale. And I'm going to throw another plug in here, if I can, for Cornell and University of Illinois' labor action tracker, which doesn't limit itself to that 1,000-person number. If you go onto the labor action tracker, you may see a lot more labor actions happening right now than the BLS is going to report.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going to go. Our friend Professor Johnny Callis, who created this phenomenal tool with a bunch of colleagues from Cornell and University of Illinois, addressed the problem that's created by the BLS data looking only at mass strikes. He looks at all labor actions, not just union actions, but also non-union actions as well. Any kind of collective action is included there. But the numbers are down even there, even in the labor action tracker. All right. I want to say thank you to Harold and Hamilton and Ali and to Ayush, our producer. Thank you all very much. Thanks for hanging around for overtime. Thank you, audience, for sticking with us. We will see you on Power at Work again very soon. Are you looking for more labor radio shows and podcasts? Well, look no further. Go to the Labor Radio Podcast Network. The network connects more than 200 radio shows and podcasts. To find more great labor content, go to www.laborradionetwork.org. Power at Work is there. You should be too.